shelter for an alien child. The cargo bay smelled like burnt ozone and old metal. Mara Velasquez rolled the kink out of her neck and told herself this was the last inspection before sleep. Port Cressida didn't care what she told herself. The rim station was a living thing that ate hours and paid her back in stubborn pride and the quiet gratitude of strangers. The freighter at Dock 12 had come in crooked. One thruster coughing sparks like a smoker's laugh. Scorch marks striped the hull. The crew filed out pale and squinting, carrying fewer crates than the manifest promised and more guilt than they could admit. Mara counted heads, counted boxers, counted breaths. "You've got damage, not disaster," she said. "We triaged the ship, then the paperwork. Anyone hurt?" A woman with a grease smear on her cheek shook her head, then hesitated. "No? Yes. It's complicated." "What part of complicated is bleeding?" "Not bleeding," the woman said, and looked over her shoulder toward the cargo ramp. "Breathing. Different." A small shape stepped into the light. He was light. That was the first impression, the kind of presence that made you hold yours. Thin limbs, translucent hair that drifted as if the station's air stirred around him differently. Eyes like deep water full of reflected stars. His skin carried a soft glow, not bright, just a promise. He wore a thin pressure wrap, one size too big, patched at the shoulder with a strip of cargo net. Mara's voice gentled without her permission. "Hey there." He watched the floor, then lifted his gaze to meet hers. "Hello," he said, in a voice that sounded like glass bells lowered into snow. Each word was careful, like a foot placed on unfamiliar stairs. "My name is Yarrow. My home is unfindable." Unfindable. The word didn't have to be true to hurt, but something in his eyes made it both. The crewwoman murmured. "We pulled a pod out of debris near Mira Sigma. No adults. No beacon we could translate. We think he's Narration." Mara had read one brief on the Narration 5 years ago, a dry set of notes about cryomining rights, and a single blurred photo of an elegant ship with wings like ice. The brief hadn't included how small Narration children looked on a human dock, or how they flinched when boots rang too hard on metal. She crouched to his height. "I'm Mara. You're safe." He held her gaze, another heartbeat. "You are not cold enough for me," he said gravely, as if apologizing for her deficiency. "Working on it," Mara said, and stood. "Med, now." They made a path through the bay to the med corridor. People moved out of the way because Mara asked, and because even the tired learn to hurry when a child is between them and whatever comes next. Dr. Salim met them at the door with the calm that made patients breathe more evenly. The scan bed hummed. Yarrow lay still, hands folded, watching the ceiling. Salim checked readouts and let out a long breath. "He's stable. Baseline temps low. He'll need a chilled environment and denser air. Oxygen fraction is fine. He's dehydrated. No obvious trauma. There's something in his throat. It looks like a harmonic node. Not a tumor. Maybe an organ. He sings," the crewwoman blurted. He sang at a broken panel, and it started working. Salim glanced at Mara. Mara glanced back with an expression that said, "Add that to the pile." The station's main line chimed. "Compliance vessel approaching," the AI announced in its neutral voice. "Compact inspection in 20 minutes. "Perfect," Mara muttered. "Of course they're on time now." Yarrow's eyes tightened. "What is compliance?" "People who make sure rules are followed," Mara said, and then, because the truth belonged to him too, added, "Not always the rules that matter." Salim covered Yarrow with a foil blanket and slid a cooling panel under the bed. "He needs a cold room within the hour." "We'll convert the old cum suite," Mara said. Selim blinked. "That rotting closet with the sulking mast relay, that's the one. It already feels like a freezer. It's not sealed. It's not compliant." Mara met his look. "Then let's make it both." They moved. Tex fetched coolant coils from storage. A dockhand who owed Mara to favors carried a crate of patch kits like a pallbearer. The cum suite smelled like old wires, and the sour memory of arguments finished badly. They ripped out dead panels and found the bones of a system that had tried its best and enjoyed no thanks for the effort. Yarrow stood in the doorway, shivering, curious. "I can help," he said softly. "I can tell the metal to remember cold." Mara looked to Salim, who pursed his mouth in a physician's version of a shrug. "We'll monitor his vitals." Yarrow put his palms to the conduit. He didn't sing so much as breathe a tone into the room, but the tone was bigger than breath. It felt like light feels on closed eyelids. The coils vibrated just enough to notice. Frost crawled over the seams and then settled. Salim's thermometer chirped. Temperature dropping. He did it. Yarrow smiled, a shy, pleased smile. "The room forgot," I reminded. "You and me both," Mara said. "All right, we're half a step ahead of the inspector. Time to be 3 steps. She opened a comms channel and dictated a petition, brisk and stubborn. Emergency ward petition under Humanitarian Clause 12. Subject Yarrow, Naredi minor. Recovered from conflict debris without guardian. No Naredi liaison present. Environmental mismatch makes immediate transfer unsafe. Port Cressida offers stable, appropriate shelter. Request temporary guardianship under Clause 12 pending contact with Naredi authorities. She sent it on the priority lane she used when someone would die if a bureaucrat paused for coffee. The AI chimed back. Petition filed. Magistrate rule convenes a tribunal in 2 hours. Transfer order from inspector pending, Mara asked. Suspended pending hearing, the AI replied. Mara squeezed the back of the chair. Good. Let the law breathe for once. Inspector Ilyakin arrived, as if the universe had printed her from a template and stamped the ink hard enough to leave a bruise. Compact uniform, precise bun. A posture that suggested she had never leaned against anything in her life. 2 compliance officers flanked her, like parentheses you couldn't escape. Officer Velasquez, she said, we're conducting a scheduled audit and reviewing your unsanctioned custody of an alien minor. Present the child. He has a name, Mara said. Yarrow Keen's gaze flicked past her into the chilled room. You altered an unsecured cum suite into an environmental chamber without authorization. I altered an unused hazard into a safe room for a freezing kid, Mara said. Cross-species custody requires accreditation, Keen recited. It exists to prevent exploitation, and laws also exist to keep people alive, Mara said. Sometimes in that order. Sometimes not. There's a hearing in 2 hours. Keen's jaw flexed. I am aware. Until then, you will not remove the minor from this chamber, and you will not allow unaccredited personnel contact. Yarrow's fingers tightened in the blanket. I do not want the gray ship, he said quietly. It smells like storms, trapped in jars. Keen's eyes flickered. Not quite empathy. A calibration. No one will remove you before the hearing, she said, and left with a swish of authority. Mara stood in the emptied doorway and exhaled slowly. Salim, keep him stable. I'll prep argument and pray to whoever reads petitions on an empty stomach. She sat in the anteroom with a cup of tea she didn't drink and organized the pieces. The boy, the law, the gap where common sense should live. She called Rin from engineering and Obi from docks and Pi from the limping freighter. She gathered statements and wrote them clean, without dramatic flourishes, because truth didn't need costumes to stand upright. Between messages, she told Yarrow about the station, and he told her about home in the ways a child can, the names for light during different snows, the taste of air on feast days, the way his people walked with palms open in winter to keep their songs from freezing inside them. He didn't talk about parents. Mara didn't ask that wound to speak. He sang sometimes under his breath. The room listened. The tribunal convened by Hala in the old cargo office, where chairs had dents that remembered all the bodies that had slumped in them over the years. Magistrate Rule's face resolved out of blue. He carried the kind of tired that lived in bones and liked its apartment. Port Cressida, he said. Compact compliance. We are convened to consider temporary guardianship of a Naredi juvenile by human station personnel under Clause 12. Petitioner, Officer Mara Velasquez. Respondent, Inspector Ilya Keen. Mara stood because she argued better on her feet. Magistrate, the child's environmental needs are incompatible with compliance vessel standards. A transfer risks harm. We request wardship until Naredi authorities can be contacted. Keen's turn came like a winter gust. Compact oversight exists to prevent trafficking and cultural harm. Officer Velasquez may be acting in good faith, but precedent matters. If every station self-assesses custody, the law becomes moot. Then let the precedent be humans keeping a child alive, Mara said. Let the mood be mercy. Rule studied them both like a mechanic staring at a panel that had lied before. Dr. Salim. Salim spoke in the precise tone of someone who had learned long ago that precision could be compassion. The child requires cold and denser air. We've improvised an environmental chamber. He is stable. A transfer to a non-modified compliance unit would endanger him. Keen glanced to one side, calculating the political weight of compassion against the gravitational field of her job. Rule turned to the hala of the station AI. Any sign of Naredi contact? Yarrow, small in the chair beside Mara, swallowed. His throat flexed, and Mara realized the organ there. Salim's harmonic node shifted like a chord waiting for a hand. May I speak? Yarrow asked. Rule blinked. You may. Yarrow closed his eyes. He didn't sing words. He released a tone like frost lit from within. It moved through the room and through the station. The hala shimmered. The comms array in the next room, long sulking in poor weather, lifted its head like a dog hearing a far whistle. The AI startled in a way only machines can, a clean break between states. Receiving a narrow beam on a cold band frequency, identifying Naredi vessel Collis. Keen's lips parted. Salim made a sound that was almost a prayer. A new voice entered, layered and crystalline. We hear you, child, the voice said, and even its translation felt like a chord played on wind. This is Elder Hera, aboard the Collis, who shelters our lost one. Mara heard her own heart, the way you hear a station after a power flicker, everything sudden and newly real. She stepped closer to the mic. Port Cressida shelters him. We found him drifting. Your currents caught him, Hera said. We remember this. Keen bowed her head slightly. The minimum iron could afford. Naredi Authority. Do you consent to Port Cressida holding temporary guardianship under compact oversight until transfer can occur under appropriate environmental conditions? We do, Hera said. And we would speak with the human who made the room, remember, cold. Rule cleared his throat. The sound of an old man touched against his better judgment. Clause 12 is satisfied. Provisional wardship granted to Port Cressida until a Naredi vessel arrives to claim custody. With compliance oversight, limited to observation only. He paused. Try not to break each other while I'm not looking. The hearing ended. Keen snapped her case files shut. I'll need to observe the chamber, she said, clipped, but not cruel. For the record. Bring tea, Mara said, surprising them both. It's going to be a long night. It was. The Naredi Collis had plotted a course, but the corridor was not kind. Pirates sniffed out the shift in traffic like sharks taste blood. The Collis slowed to avoid an ambush, and the waiting stretched. Port Cressida did what humans do when waiting would be despair if you let it. They built, and told jokes, and fixed old grudges by putting new work on top of them. Yarrow walked the station, in short excursions, wrapped in a cold field cloak. Salim tuned to his pulse. He learned the names of pipes. He learned that humans curse like poets when bolts strip. He learned how a cheap mug warms hands, and how warmth can be a kindness even to a body that prefers cold. He learned to say thank you in 3 Deccan dialects. Mara learned the shapes of his silences. She learned that when he said he was not tired, he wanted to be where she was. She learned that his songs could coax not just temperature but memory out of old machines. Files reappeared that the station thought lost. Logs spoke up about past storms. An air filter admitted it had been pretending to work and let itself be repaired. She also learned the limits of song. Songs couldn't make credits multiply. They couldn't make pirates polite. The pirates came. It began as a tremor through the gossip layers, a ship gone dark, a beacon dragging like a broken bell. Port Cressida's long range picked up a convoy's scatter. The AI's voice lost a shade of neutrality. Unidentified vessels approaching the corridor. Estimated time to our radius, 3 hours. Keen arrived at Mara's console with a look that said she would rather argue about form, and found that function had eaten the table. You can't engage, she said. This station is not a warship. This station is a home, Mara said. Homes defend themselves. The compact will dispatch patrol. The compact will arrive to count the bodies if we don't think faster. Yarrow stood at the hatch, clutching his cloak. They smell like storms in jars, he whispered. Mara knelt. We have 3 hours. What can your songs do against people? He shook his head. Songs don't stop people. They ask rooms to be kinder. Then we make rooms that make people kinder to us by accident, Mara said, rising. Rin, Obi, Pi. I want every decoy ping we've got, and 3 we don't. I want the comms mast tuned to cold band whisper, so the Collis hears us. And I want the corridor full of ghosts. Keen pressed her lips thin. This is irregular. This is survival, Mara said. You want compliance? Help us live long enough to comply. Keen's shoulders dropped the width of a breath. What do you need? Your authority to legally fudge a few antenna licenses, Mara said, and your hands. They built a net of phantoms and memories. Yarrow stood in the core and sang a map into being, past storms. Exhaust trails. The afterscent of ships that had moved through this space and left fingerprints only a mind like his noticed. He wove those fractions into decoys the pirates would chase like cats after a dot of light. The first pirate ship sniffed the bait and lunged. It fired at a phantom convoy. The shots blew holes in yesterday. The second ship, Kinnear, skimmed the edge and pinged for life. The station pulsed nothing. The station hummed uninteresting truths. Mara watched the scope like a gambler and felt in her bones when the trick would hold and when it would break. It broke. The third ship was patient. It slid past the ghosts and found the heartbeat of the station like a thief listening for a sleep breath. It angled toward Dock 12 like memory. Come home. Brace, Mara said. Everyone not actively engaged in defense. To shelters. Obi, seal the fuel backbone. Rin, if you love me, make the coolant scream so anyone trying to cut in gets a face full of station weather. Keen tapped her come. Compliance vessel Moonin to pirate vector. You are entering. Compact protection radius. Disengage. This transmission is recorded. The pirate broadcast a laugh. Record this, a voice said. But didn't say anything anyone would want recorded in polite company. Then Yarrow stepped forward and put his palm on the station's heart. He didn't sing loudly. He sang a barely there note that made the hull relax by a fraction. It was enough. The pirate's first boarding clamp hit metal that didn't resonate in the way their tools expected. The bite slipped. The second clamp found purchase, and then jolted as a coolant scream iced it from the inside. Who taught the room to fight? Rin whispered. The room learned, Mara said, hands white on the rail. With a good teacher. The pirates tried again. The station groaned as stress moved through old bones and found newer joints to share the load. Mara thought, fleetingly, and with a kind of guilty awe, that Port Cressida felt graceful, like a dancer who had been told all her life she was a brick, and then discovered breath. The Moonin slid between the pirate and the dock. A warning shot cracked the dark. The pirate backed off enough to save face, and not enough to leave. Then a new light cut the black like the first star after a long winter. The Colossus arrived. It entered the corridor with a silence that was not absence, but poise. Its wings unfurled, not like weapons, but like a thought completed. The pirates tasted the difference, and found it bitter. They left angry and alive, because cowards prefer both. Port Cressida exhaled. The old bolts kept the air in. Elder Hera came through the lock like a promise remembered. Her skin glowed a little more than Yarrow's, as if age had taught light where to rest. Her eyes took in Mara and Keen and Selim and the patched seams and the frost on the conduit with one long, soft look that made grown humans stand straighter. "You kept him," she said, voice like a cord stretched over water. "We tried," Mara said, surprised at the roughness of her voice. "You sang our bands back to us," Hera said to Yarrow, pride gentling the words. "You were brave and true." He ran to her, then paused and looked back at Mara, asking permission for a thing no law covered. Mara nodded. He leaped, and Hera stooped, and the sound the two of them made when they met had no human analog except maybe the noise inside a chest. When grief breaks and something bright comes through the crack, Keen stepped forward, not stiff for once. "Elder Hera," she said, "under compact guidelines, we must formalize, transfer, and certify no exploitation occurred." Hera tilted her head, and for a heartbeat, Mara thought the Elder would sing the inspector's paperwork into forgiving itself. Instead, Hera said, "We have laws too. Some of them are wise. Some of them are afraid. Today, we will ask them to learn." They signed things. They read statements. They told truths in boxes that preferred tidy lies. The magistrate sent a commendation, which on most days meant nothing, and on this day meant a little more. The Minin logged a defensive action and did not claim credit that wasn't theirs, which Keen ensured with a form whose ink felt different even to her. Hera pressed a shard into Mara's hand. It lay on her skin like a drop of winter that didn't melt. "If you need us, sing to this," Hera said. "It knows the path your kindness took." Mara didn't trust her voice. "I'll keep it near the coffee machine," she managed. "That's where heroics usually start around here." Yarrow hugged her. He smelled like cold air in a forest. "Humans sing," he whispered against her shoulder. "Only when we're scared," she said. "And when you build," he said. "And when you miss, sometimes all three." He stepped back into the fold of his people and looked small again, the way children do when the world makes sense long enough for them to be exactly their size. Hera inclined her head to Mara. "We remember," she said, and left the words open enough to hold more than thanks. The Colossus departed with a grace that made Port Cressida seem, for a heartbeat, gaudy. Then Mara looked around and saw the station, as she always did, after someone she not cared about left, imperfect and beloved and needing her hands. Life resumed with a determination that felt like defiance. Crates arrived. Crates left. The coolant that had screamed simmered instead, a contented kettle. The comes mast, which used to forget storms, began to predict them in a way that felt less like calculation and more like remembering together. Old files turned up in corners the AI swore it had already cleaned. Rin found a note from a long-retired tech embedded in a panel, a joke about bolts and love. Obi stopped carrying grief like a sack and began carrying it like a tool he could use to fix other things. Inspections happen when they happen, and Keen still had a job. She tried to be harder than the day asked for, and found that the day was harder than she needed to be. She drank Mara's bad coffee and filled out forms more gently than before. She caught herself once, touching the wall, as if it might sing back. A week later, a courier arrived, wearing the crisp neutrality of official favors. The package he handed Mara carried the cool seal, and a note that translated itself, as she read, A Narration message bound to human script. We remember Port Cressida. We remember Mara Velasquez, Dr. Salim, Reen, Obi, and the inspector who let the law learn. We send a gift, a pattern your rooms can sing when storms lean down to listen. Use it with kindness. Do not force it. Songs bruise when bent. Inside lay a wafer that looked like frost that had decided to stop pretending to be delicate. Salim held it up to the light and laughed, delighted and humbled. A harmonic lattice. If this does what I think it does, our environmental control will stop acting like a bored cat. They installed it with more ritual than usual. Steady hands, quiet voices. Yarrow's shard hummed in Marrow's pocket like a heartbeat the size of a little boy. When they brought the lattice online, the station took a breath that felt like a thought resolving. From then on, Port Cressida kept winter better. Not the season, the kindness of it. Heat, where it belonged. Cold, where it healed. Air that remembered lungs at different tempos. Machines that argued less and offered more. People noticed the difference and didn't know what to call it. So they called it luck, and then they called it Port Cressida being Port Cressida. And then they stopped calling it anything and just lived inside it. Months blurred. The rim always does that. A calendar written in grease and sleep. Sometimes, when Mara closed her eyes in the office, she refused to admit was also a cot. She thought she heard a child humming down the corridor, and she smiled before she could stop herself. One quiet shift, long after the auditors left and the pirates found a different stream to foul. The shard in the mug by her elbow pulsed. Not urgent, just present. Mara picked it up and said, "Hey, kid." A tone answered, small and true. She spoke into the sound like a secret shared under a blanket. "We're okay. We argue with bolts. We keep the lights on. Salim invented a soup he claims is stew. Rin and Obi are pretending they're not a thing. And I keep expecting to turn a corner and trip over you underfoot and scold you for being exactly where I told you not to be." The shard hummed, and for a moment the office smelled like cold air and clean snow. A second tone joined the first higher, older. Hera's voice, translated by kindness, more than tech. "We remember. We've taught your lattice to listen for you when you sing. If your storms grow teeth again, call." "Deal," Mara said. "You do the same." "Humans," Hera said, and the translation put a smile in the word. "You make homes in unlikely places." "Someone has to," Mara said. "The universe keeps leaving messes where there should be tables." The tone faded. The shard cooled. The station hummed. Mara set the shard back in its mug and watched the steam curl from her cup and thought about the shape of a day in which she had not known a Narration child, and how that day would always seem poorer now, even if everything else stayed the same. A chime at the door. "Kino, Ilya now?" When she wasn't wearing the uniform like a shield stud, with an expression she probably would have put in a report, if she could have without mocking herself later. "Inspection," she said, and then, sheepish, "Not that kind, personal. Rin asked me to invite you to the mess. There's stew. Or soup. It's an argument in a bowl." Mara stood, stretched the spine that always complained about kindness done in crates lifted instead of words spoken. "If I don't go, he'll sulk," she said. "He will," Ilya agreed. "And Obi will pretend he isn't sulking, while sulking in sympathy." They walked toward the mess. The corridor lights caught and held a moment longer than it took to be useful. The way a friend holds a door, as you reach it so you feel welcomed instead of observed. People nodded. Someone laughed. Somewhere, a bolt refused to move, and then, reconsidering, decided love was easier as they turned the corner. Mara glanced back down the long utilitarian hall toward the cold room that had begun as an old come sweet and ended as a lesson. She didn't need the shard to hear the echo of a child's small, determined tone. Port Cressida had it now, woven into her own song. Humans make homes in unlikely places, she thought. and then they make those places unlikely to fall down in the mess. The stew was terrible in a way shared meals often are, when the point of them is not culinary excellence, but the presence of you. Rain lifted a spoon and saluted. Obi set down bowls like medals. Salim told a story about the time he inoculated a stubborn engine against melodrama. Ilya sat and pretended not to enjoy herself, and failed. Mara ate, and listened, and laughed, and let the room be kinder to her than she asked it to be. She had work stacked to the ceiling and a station that would never be done wanting, and a galaxy that would never be done needing. But for this hour, the world was the size of a table, and the people at it, and the faint hum of a shard in her pocket that reminded cold rooms how to love warm hands. Later, on a midnight that lacked the sun's permission, she walked the rings alone. She paused at Dock 12 and pressed her palm to the bulkhead. "Good job," she told the metal. The metal said nothing. It didn't have to. It had already answered. On the outer viewport, stars gathered like neighbors with opinions. She tilted her head and sang, quietly, a human song with too much longing and not enough technique. The station carried the note down her bones and into itself. It didn't need the words. It understood gratitude, stubbornness, and the kind of fierce care that the rim grew in hard soil. Somewhere, under a different sky, an already child heard a faint note in the walls and slept easier. Somewhere, a pirate thought twice when a corridor smelled not like fear, but like memory. Somewhere, a magistrate poured tea and signed a form a little faster. Somewhere, a law bent and didn't break. Mara leaned her forehead against the glass. Sleep, she told the station, and herself. And the idea of family that had stopped asking for permission and started insisting on practice. "We've got morning." The station held her reflection and put stars in her eyes. She hadn't earned and would spend the rest of her life paying forward. She laughed, because that was a good debt. She walked back to her catafis with hands that had been cold, now warm, and a shard in her pocket that knew the path to kindness, and back again. Port. Cressida slept the way busy places do, with one ear open. In the cold room, frost traced feathers on the pipes like writing you had to learn by living here. In the mess, someone had left a bowl soaking, and a note that said, in Rin's block letters, "Sorry, I promised Obi I'd clean it, and then forgot. Future me, please, be kind," in the dock. Lights blinked a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of a story that had chosen to happen here. Humans, Mara thought, as she closed the door and let the dark be sweet instead of empty. We sing when we're scared, when we build, when we miss. We sing when the universe misplaces a child, and we sing him home, or close enough that home can find him. And if the next storm came with teeth, if the next inspector brought sharper rules, if the next pirate learned a new trick, then she would do what humans do, count heads, count crates, count breaths, and refuse to let any of them be the last, if hands and will could help it. The shard on her desk pulsed once before sleep, like a little heartbeat somewhere else, reaching to touch her hand across a distance songs knew how to fold. She smiled into the pillow. "Good night, Charo," she said, and didn't need the universe to answer to know it had heard.